Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is the next video in the Robotics Enterprise Framework series with UiPath. In this series, we are exploring a very important topic of UiPath, which is called Robotics Enterprise Framework, also known as the RE Framework. We already have covered the basics and the project both as well as in English as well as Hindi language. The link of both the playlist is available in the description. In case you are coming to the channel for the first time and you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing to the channel to get the next videos in the series. Today, we are going to use RE framework for a linear process. It might sound a little bit technical, but trust me, it is important and it is interesting as well, right? If I talk about the agenda, the first thing is we are going to see what exactly are the type of transactions. How do you differentiate linear, iterative or transactional? Because that is the first thing which as a developer I should know which kind of automation I am creating. Post that we are going to create an automation in linear process. We are going to analyze what actually is missing in that code. Then we are going to implement the same in an robotics enterprise framework. For that, we will convert the framework to a linear process and then we'll implement this same automation in an RE framework. We'll compare what are the benefits, how do you change the RE framework, and all of that we are going to do in a step-by-step manner. And the last thing, whatever we do today in this video, I am going to share the code and the complete framework to you so that you can actually refer and keep it for your future references for future linear processes. Right, at any point of time, if you want to jump to a specific section, I understand that some of you are advanced developer and who directly want to jump to a specific section. We have timestamp in the description of the video. You just click on the timestamp and the video should navigate to that part, right? So you don't have to watch the complete video. You can always jump to a specific section. But if you are someone who wants to understand this complete concept in a step-by-step manner, I would request you to watch the complete video. That will give you more insight. Having said that, let's get started. So, first thing first, what exactly is a transaction? Whenever we talk about the transaction, it simply represents the minimum amount of data or the minimum amount of steps which as a developer or the automation has to do to fulfill a section of a business process. So for example, we are writing an automation where our goal is to just download some data from a mailbox. So what would be the steps? The steps would be simple, right? Open the mailbox, read the email, go to the specific email and download the attachments. Once the attachment is downloaded, that means the job or that specific part of the automation is done. That means that was one transaction. Whenever we talk about transaction, it means that it is atomic. Now what do you mean by atomic? The atomic simply means that whatever you have done, the automation does not require to do it again. If you are doing it again, that means it is a new transaction. So, to understand, a transaction simply means the minimum number of steps which the automation needs to do to complete a business process. Once the steps are completed, it is assumed that we no longer need the business process and it is completed successfully or it has got some exception. So, that is what it is called a transaction. When it comes to identifying of the transaction, transaction is of three types: linear, iterative and transactional. Now why we are discussing this transaction? Before I directly jump into the coding, we need to first understand the automation which I am doing, whether it's a linear process, it's an iterative process or is it a transactional process. And as a developer, it is your responsibility to categorize the automation correctly as linear, iterative or transactional, and then you directly jump to the framework or the coding part, right? So first we need to understand whatever automation I am doing, which category it is falling. So we have linear, iterative and transactional. Now the question arises, how as a developer I would know that whether it's a linear, iterative or transactional? And the answer is this. If you have a process where you have to do all the steps only once, that means you are writing a linear process. To take an example, let's say you are writing an automation where the robot is supposed to read an email, extract the information from the email, put it in a website and send an email, and this has to be done only once. Okay, so Monday morning the robot will come, it will read the email, extract the content, fill up the data and job done. Tuesday it will again come and do the same thing, but in a particular run till the time the robot start and the robot end, this same thing is done only once. So if it is done only once, that means it is a linear transaction. If you see the structure which is seen on the screen, it simply means that you initialize, you get the data, you process the data and you end the process. It happens only once. In case you want to rerun, that would be treated as the fresh run. So linear process are usually simple, easy to implement and are suitable where all the steps are happening one by one. So in case you are writing some automation which has to be done only once, you categorize that as a linear transaction. Okay, I hope that is clear. The next one is called the iterative transaction, which simply means the steps are performed multiple times, but each time a different data is used. Okay, now what does this mean? So for example, you are writing an automation for a company, okay, where you have to reset password for a group of employees and the group of employee are in the email. Okay, so the robot will receive an email. That email will have all the list of employees, let's say 100 employees. Now the robot has to simply reset all the password of those 100 employees. So it will initialize, it will get the data. In this get data, it means that all the 100 records are getting once. Then the robot is going to process the data one by one and this will end. So this is called iterative process, but this is a challenge, right? I have got 100 email ID which I was processing. The robot processed the first one, second one, and while doing the third one, it got some exception. Now what would happen? The robot will not go to the fourth one. It will stuck at number 3 and it will completely stop the process. That means that is the huge disadvantage of the iterative process. If there is any item which has interrupted, the complete process is failed and all the items are unprocessed. You might have a requirement, it's not like that this is a problem, right? You might have a requirement where you want to do the execution only if the previous one is completed. Then you use the iterative process, right? Init, get data, and if you see this guy here, the process data all are happening one by one. So any exception happens, if happens at the first item, second item, third item, it is going to impact the other 97 items, right? And will only happen when all the items are processed. So this is called iterative transaction and you have to do this as per your requirement. Okay. The last one is called the transactional processing. By the look and feel, you might be thinking that Mukesh, this is the same as the iterative one also. But here is the difference. In the transactional processing, we do the processing for multiple items as we are doing in iterative. But the difference is that all these items are processed individually as transaction. Take the same example of those 100 employees. Now, instead of processing all the items one by one, all those 100 email ID where we have to reset the password would be added as 100 transactions. Now, when you say 100 transaction, it means that transaction number 1 has no dependency on transaction number 2, 2 has no dependency on 1 and 3, 3 has no dependency on anything. All of these transactions are independent of each other and they do not share any data or any information among themselves. When we are creating such process, that kind of process is called the transactional processing. So if you see the diagram now, we initialize, we get the data. Now getting the data is also in a transactional manner. Either you can get the data all at once, or you can get data from individual sources as well. Now when it comes to processing, all the items are processed individually. So if I have got 3 items, the 3 items are processed individually, which means if item number 1 fails, it has no impact on number 2. If number 2 fails, it has no impact on number 3, right? So this is called a transaction, and this is mostly used for very big large processes, whereas in the iterative, all of them were processed one by one. So whenever we have to do a process where we want the items to process independently, we call that as a transactional processing. Just to give an example, let's say you are writing an automation where you have to reset the ServiceNow tickets. Okay, now you have received 10 ServiceNow tickets. First ticket is of employee 1, second ticket is of employee 2, third ticket is of employee 3, right? If the first ticket has some incomplete information, I do not want the remaining 9 tickets to have some issue. Rather, I'll just mark the first ticket as fail, and I'll ask the robot to process the 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on. Even if the transaction number 2 is fail or it is successful, it has no impact. Such thing is called the transactional processing, right? So we have 3 kinds of transaction: linear, iterative and transactional processing, right? And whenever we talk about robotics enterprise framework, by default robotics enterprise framework is built to take care of the transactional processing, right? RE framework by default is meant to work on the transactional processing. And how does that happen? With the help of queues. But sometimes we have processes which are iterative, sometimes we have processes which are linear. Now the question, can I use an RE framework for linear transaction? The answer is yes, we can definitely use. And the next question, how? That's what we are looking into this video. Okay. So about transactional processing and RE framework, we have already covered both in English and Hindi, right? As you can see, we have covered the dispatcher, performer, what are the different states, and we have built a couple of use cases. All of them are transactional processing. None of them is a linear process. This same thing we have already covered in the Hindi as well. So the people who are more comfortable in Hindi, you can watch this Hindi playlist. The same thing, right? States, RE framework, and these use cases, all of them are transactional processing, right? Today, what we are going to do is we are going to create the same RE framework but for a linear process. And whenever you are building these use cases, these framework, right, you would require the code. So you no need to worry. All these code, everything I have shared on my website. You would find the website link in description. So any of the use case which you are practicing from here, including the today's use case, right? Today we are going to create a framework for linear process. That framework would be also available in the same website, right? So for a learner point of view, it won't make any difference to you, right? You just start with any of this playlist and find the videos link. In case you find any difficulty, you can email me. Everything is available on the website. Link is available in the description. Okay, so now I believe that you have got a background of RE framework. You know what is transaction. You understood what is a linear process. Let's code an automation first without a robotics enterprise framework and see what are the problems I get when I code an automation without RE framework, and then we will convert a framework and then we'll implement the same automation in the RE framework as well. Okay, so let's now code an automation without robotics enterprise framework. Okay, so this would be the simple automation which we want to do today. So our objective is simple. We have to go to this website which is called RPA sample/suppliers, right? So the robot is expected to go to this website. Then the robot should come on this button which is export CSV. When the robot clicks on it, it downloads a CSV in the product folder, and then the robot should simply log a message saying that hey, the process was completed at this time. So this are total 3 steps, right? Let's quickly note it down so that we don't forget it, right? So we have to first, step number 1 is go to this website. Step number 2 is export the CSV. Step number 3 is log the time, right? Now all this is happening 1, 2, 3 step by step. That means it is a linear process, right? And I can always code this thing in a sequence, right? I do not necessarily require RE framework. So let's try to first code it in a sequence. Okay, so I'm back in my UiPath Studio. On the right hand side, you see there is something which is called template, and in the template it says that create a transactional business process, right? Now I hope you understand what is transactional, right? This we have already explored in the RE framework series, so not spending much time here, right? But mine is a linear process, right? Step 1, 2, 3. So I can always create a sequence, right? So I'll go here and I say create a process. I'm not using the RE framework, by the way. Okay, so I'll create a process and I'll call this is a linear process, and I would say that best practice, this is a process without RE framework. I can say create, right? We'll just wait for the automation to load. So here what we are going to do is we are going to write an automation, right? So as a developer, many of you might not be using an RE framework, and you would always think that hey, I can always write this automation in my plain sequence, right, or a flowchart. Why do I have to use RE framework, right? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a small automation where I'm going to write this automation in a plain sequence, and then together you and me will analyze that what are the things which are missing, and as a developer what are the things I need to do here, right? So this is a plain sequence. I open the main workflow, right? Now if I have to go here, the first thing first is I have to open this website. So I'll go here, Control A, Control C, right? I'll go here in the activities, and we have to first open the browser. So I'll use an activity called open browser, right? And you can see that I am not getting the open browser activities because I am in the modern design, right? So for the people who don't understand what is modern and what is classic, guys, we have a different series for that, modern and classic, right? So you have to go to this filter option here and filter by classic. Okay, and now you should get the classic activities, right? You can use the modern as well, but most of us are coming from the classic experience, so I'm using classic, right? So I go here and I say classic, and now I should get the open browser. Okay, so now in the UI automation I am getting open browser, right? What was the next thing? My requirement was simple. I have to go here and pass the URL. Okay, URL passed, then I have to click, so I'll use a click activity, and here it is, classic. Okay, indicate element inside the browser, and I'll just point it to this button which says export the CSV. Okay, done. And once it is exported, we simply want to log a message, right, that what is the time. So I say log a message. I'll say this is an information. Okay, and I'll simply log a message that export was success. At what time? How do you specify the time? You simply use now.toString. That's it, right? Linear process, straightforward automation. I'll just do a Control+S in the browser. Let me just specify the browser type as Edge. Okay, and here let me quickly validate the selector as well. Highlight, yeah, it's highlighting. Okay, so I'll close this. I'll hit OK. Edge is not open. Let's quickly run this and run the file. Okay, now if everything works good, our automation should open the Edge browser. As you can see, this green indicates the browser. It opens the website. then it should click on the export CSV, exported, and in the log, in the output, we see that the export was successful. This is the current date and time. Now this is done, right? Automation is successful. I didn't use RE framework to do any of this. What exactly is missing in that automation, that we need to discuss, right? So right now we just had a linear process, only 3-step process which we coded, and I was able to do the same thing in a sequence. Now a question arises, why actually I need RE framework, and what are the things which as a developer I need to think, right? I will just give you some example, but when we actually see the RE framework, it has a lot of advantages. Okay, so what's missing in that code, right? Let's go back to the code and see that. The first thing, right? My automation start with an activity called open browser. If I rerun this automation, it is going to open a new instance of the Edge browser, and I will have two instances of the same browser. There are some applications which does not allow you to have multiple instances. That means the first thing which is missing here is that we do not clean the environment. Now what exactly does the clean means? Sometime this browser might be in a not responding mode, or this is stuck, or there are some operations which has caused that browser to be in a not responding, non-responsive mode, right? So before I start my automation, I would like to my environment to be clean. So as of now I am doing it manually, right? I am closing this and then we are doing. So that means that I have to write a logic here first to actually clean the environment. So first thing which was missing here was the cleaning of the environment. Now you think here, today the URL is rpsamples.com/suppliers. Tomorrow somebody comes and say that, hey Mukesh, now the website name is rpsample.com. This URL is hard coded here. So that means tomorrow if the URL changes, as a developer I need to come here, do the changes again, retest it, redeploy, and then implement the change. This is just a URL, right? Think of an automation which you have 100 activities, 200 activities. Moving forward, here we have used a log message activity and we are just typing a message which is called export was success. Tomorrow the business says that, hey, we don't want this message, we want you to write a message which says that the file was exported successfully, right? Activity is same, but this message has to be changed. Again the same thing, you have to come here, do the changes, and then deploy, right? So that means that with only 3 activities, we have a lot of things which are missing. Important thing, there is no exception handling. Whenever we talk about automation, we need to always take care of the exception handling. What happens? This browser does not respond. Do I need to retry? Obviously yes. If the browser is not responding, I want it to have a retry mechanism. Try at least once, try twice, and then give an exception. There is no logging. When this automation run from orchestrator, how do I know whether the browser was open, whether the export was successful, right? I just have a log message. There is no exception handling. There is no separate business or system exception, which means that I do not know whether the browser was not responding or the URL was wrong. So I have to do an exception handling. I have to write code to manage this. I have to manage these messages. I have to separate the business and the system exception. I'm not saying that you cannot do it. You always can do it, right? But you have to think a lot and you have to do a lot of code. How about I get all of this in a framework? And that's what RE framework does, right? RE framework gave us all of these things in a predefined manner, but the problem is RE framework only give this for a transactional processing. So we have seen what was missing. Now if I talk about the benefits, these are some of the benefits which we have already discussed in the RE framework series, right? For the people who are just looking at this video, I'm quickly covering that what exactly are the benefits. You get a structured development, right? In a company you have 15 team members. Mukesh has a different way of coding. You have a different way of coding, right? My manager codes it differently. Now If there are new team members coming and everybody has a different type of coding, how are you going to manage the code? RE framework provides you a structured development way so that your code is consistent across the different team members. It is easy to manage the code base. The next thing is modularity and reusability. Modular means dividing the problem statement into different models so that you can reuse the component. RE framework does that. Error handling and recovery. RE framework has got the exception handling, recovery mechanism, logging, retry of the failed transaction, everything is there. Logging and reporting, it's already there. RE framework by default have the logging mechanism and it has the built-in reporting as well. Configurability is an important thing, right? Same like whenever the time changes, the URL changes, you need to increase the value, you need to store, you need to change the password. All of that thing is available in the form of a configuration file, that is called configurability. And the last one, scalability, which means that tomorrow you need to add new stages, new functionality. As the project grows in complexity, you can always alter the framework. So these are some of the framework which RE framework provides. So the question arises, why are we not using this RE framework for linear process? And the answer to that is that by default RE framework is meant to only use for transactional processing. Now how should I convert it? So that is what we are going to see next, that how you can convert the existing RE framework to work for a linear process. Okay, so let's create the framework, right? You can follow along with me, and at the end of this video you would have a framework with you. In case you miss some of the step, I am anyways going to upload this framework on my website, so you can directly download it from there, right? But I would suggest just follow along so that you don't forget it, right? Okay, so this was the automation. We have seen the challenges, we know the benefits, right? Let's go to the home. Okay, so now let's create the framework. Okay, I am back in my UiPath studio, and you can see here there is something which is called the Robotics Enterprise Framework, and it says that it is for a transactional business process, but we want to manipulate this for a linear process, right? And we are creating the framework. So I'll click on this which says Robotics Enterprise Framework. It will install the template, and we will rename this template, right? We will call that this is a template for linear process. When I say template, we are going to store it in our studio, we are going to keep it with ourselves, so whenever in future I have a new linear process, I use directly this framework, right? So I say that this is an Robotics Enterprise Framework for a linear process, and I say create. Okay, now what is going to happen? RE framework is going to load, right? We have just changed the name, guys. We have not made the framework yet, right? Once it is loaded successfully, we'll do the manipulation, and then we will see how does it work for a linear process. Okay, so I'll go here and I say open the main workflow, and voila, right? This is the complete RE framework built to work with transactional processing, has 4 stages. Not spending any time here because we have explored a lot, right? So please watch the previous videos, guys, in case you want to understand this, right? So we want to convert this into a framework. Okay, now what is a linear? A linear is something which is executing only once. If you remember our presentation, what happens in the linear? You have the initialization, then you get the data only once, then you process the data only once, and then you end the data, right? So that means we need init, get data, process data, and end. The only difference is the get data should only happen once, and the process data should also happens once. Okay, by default RE framework is following this architecture. The init and the end is exactly the same, guys, right? So where is the change required? The change is required in the get data, right? We do not want to get the data multiple times, right? We only want to do it once, and we only want to process it once, right? If I am getting the data only once, the processing definitely would be done only once, right? So the change is going to happen in the get data, right? I hope this is clear now. Okay, so let's go back to the automation again. Okay, so init, no change, end process, no change. Okay, first thing first, we are going to go here and we are going to say what is the process title, right? So this is a linear framework. Always make it a good practice, right, to start with this thing. You can specify who is the author, right? So my name is Mukesh. You can specify your name and you can just give what you are trying to do here, right? So you start here. So we are not going to change the initialization and end process because that is the same both in the linear as well as in the transaction. Now when you go to the get transaction data, double click to open this. Inside the get transaction data, we are having a sequence which is called get transaction data dot XAML. This is the guy who is responsible to get the transactions one by one from the queue. Now, do I want to get it one by one from the queue, or I only want to get it once? My requirement is I do not want to go again and again. So that means that we have to do the manipulation in this guy, get the transaction data. Okay, so inside get transaction data, I'll just repeat, open it, get transaction data. Here in the else part, you have this XAML which is called get transaction data dot XAML. Open this workflow and you should see something like this which is called get transaction data. Now get transaction data by default is meant to work with the orchestrator queues. How do I know? You don't have to trust me. You see here, get transaction data is getting the data from orchestrator queue, and this is a transactional processing which is happening one by one. So if your queue has 10 items, it get the 10 items and it does the processing, right? You can also change this to work with Excel, data table, list of string, right? That is a separate topic and we already have created a framework, by the way, for that as well, right? We have converted this to work with data table. So that is a separate video, link is available in the description. Okay, now here I do not want to get this transaction one by one again from the queue. But how does REFramework does that? If you see here in the arguments, REFramework has this transaction number here, which is an input argument. Okay, and what is the value? If you go back in the else, right, where it was getting invoked, if you click on import arguments, okay, you would see here the transaction number has a value which is called the transaction number. And what is this transaction number? This is a variable. If you go to the variable here, and that variable has a default value of 1, transaction number. Now what does this thing do? Okay, let me just hit enter here. Okay, by default this is our actual plan. Okay, by default the transaction number is set to 1. So what happens in the REFramework? The robot goes, it reads the transaction number, it says that hey, the transaction number is 1, it goes to the queue and it gets the transaction number 1. Now what happens once this is done? It increments this transaction number and it says that whatever the transaction number you have, increment it 1 and then you get it 2, and then the robot goes and get you the next transaction. Similarly, once this is done, it again goes here, it again increments the transaction number, make it to 3 and it keeps on going, right? So concept is simple, right? There is no magic happening. This transaction number keeps on incrementing, it keeps on getting the transaction. Now what is our plan? We want to execute it only once. So what we will do is, once it is executed, right, we will not fetch all of any of this. We will tell REFramework only to process the data if the transaction number is 1. Now how we are going to do that we are going to see in a moment, but our plan is simple. We will let REFramework increment this number and everything what it does, right? We are simply going to say that if the transaction number is 1, then only you process, otherwise ignore it, right? So that's the plan. Okay, and the default value of transaction number is 1. So let's go back to the get transaction data, which is here. Now in the get transaction data, you have this XAML, this activity which is called get transaction item, which is getting the data from the queue, right? I do not have the queue, I just want to execute once, right? So I'll go here and I'll comment this. Okay, now if you see here, how does RE framework know whether a new transaction is there or not, right? If you see here at the bottom, it says that if a new transaction is there, out transaction item is an argument here, which is queue item. If the transaction item has a value, then it understands that it is a new transaction, right? We have already seen this in detail in the RE framework, so not spending much time here. But if I want to think RE framework that there is a new transaction, I need to set this value. Because if I will not set this value, what would happen? It will simply go to the else and it will say that I don't have any transaction and it will stop the process. So I need to make this code think that yes, we have at least some transaction. Okay, but we want to do it only for transaction number 1, right? So what we are going to do here, where we have commented, I'm going to put a if activity. If, drag and drop the if, right? I'll simply write a statement. I'll say that if the transaction number is equal to 1, hard coded, if the transaction number is equal to 1, because that is the default value and it is going to run for the first time. If the transaction number is 1, then I'm going to use an assign activity and I'm going to say you set this variable, which is the transaction item. I would say out transaction item. Now if you see here, see this, out transaction item is of the type queue item. Okay, so I am going to go here and I say that new queue item. That's it. I don't have the transaction, anything, right? But I am initializing this variable, because here after this sequence is completed, it is checking whether the transaction item is there or not. So if I don't set this to new item, this will set that there is no transaction and it will immediately go to the end process. But I do not want to do it, right? If the transaction number is 1, then only set this value, right? So the first time this will run successfully, it will say that okay, I have got a transaction, it will process, it will go to the process and do the processing. But what will happen? RE framework by default is going to increment the number like this, right? This we have seen in the RE framework as well. So I say that when the next time it will come, this transaction number would be set to 2. So if this is set to 2, I will trick RE framework and I say that the transaction item is nothing. That's it. So what would happen? First time the transaction number is 1, it will say that okay, I have got a queue item. It will go to this condition, right? This is by default written. It will think that okay, I have got some transaction, so I need to go to the process. RE framework will do the processing, come back for the next transaction and it will increment this to 2. It will come here and see that oh, I don't have a transaction, so it will immediately stop the process. That's it. Control plus S, and that is one change which you have to do in this, right? You have to include this if statement. So what is this if statement? I'll just rewrite it here. This if is for the only one transaction. Okay, so get transaction data is completed. That's the only change you have to do. This is only going to work only once. Okay, now since we are doing here new queue item, if you guys remember, by default RE framework in this one, right? If you go here, it will go here, and what is the condition for new transaction? If you double click on this, so when the transaction number is 1, the transaction item is not nothing, it will go to the process transaction. Whenever the transaction item is 2, 3 and 4, it will go to end process, right? So that means this block will execute only once. Once the transaction number is 2, it will similarly say that okay, I don't have any data, and it will go to end process. Why it will go to no data? Because in the else I have said set it to nothing, right? Now one property by default of transactional processing is that it tries to set the status back to the queue, right? Which we have already seen in the RE framework series, that it set the status back to the queue. So in the process transaction, set the transaction status, right? If you see here, set transaction status XAML, I say open the workflow. Okay, now this is a XAML which is called set the transaction status, that attempts to set the queue status, right? It's written here, business rule exception, system exception, all of this RE framework goes and try to set it in the queue, but I don't have a queue item here, right? So what we need to do is, wherever in the case of success, business exception and system exception, right, wherever it is trying to go there and try to set the exception, we are just going to comment out that code, right? And by the way, this is the place where the increment happens. Okay, so we'll go to the success first. Here in the try, you see set transaction status. This is trying to attempt the queue item, so our transaction item is not here, so you just have to come here and disable it, right? You can delete this as well, but I prefer disabling, so that in case you want it, you can get it again, right? Control plus S. I'll again go back, the same thing, I'll do it in the business transaction, disable it. Okay, and the same thing I'll do it in the system exception as well. Here try set the system exception, which is this one. Okay, set transaction status. So the idea is simple, right? I don't have the transaction, so where I will set the status, I have disabled all the three, and that's it. My complete automation is going to run only once now. Let's test it. Okay, so I'll go to the process transaction. Inside the process XAML, right, here it says that invoke the process here, right? So I'm going to say some log message here. Okay, I'll drag and drop this activity here, and I say this is an info, and I will say just, if you see the argument, in the argument you have the config and you have the transaction item here, right? So in here I'm simply going to type hello, and I am going to type the time. Okay, now dot to string, right? So you would understand how does this thing work. I'll save this, right? If I run this process now, and in the process transaction, if I get only the hello single time, that means my automation is working fine. Okay, so I'll go here and I'll say run the file. Okay, the same RE framework, I have done some changes, right? So let's have a quick eye on the output, right? If everything goes well, it should stop after the first transaction, and that means that we have converted this to the linear process. Okay, so the automation has started and it ended also, right? Let's go to the output. Automation started, killing the process, processing transaction number 1, started the process, then it printed the hello, transaction was successful, it got the next transaction, and then it finished due to the no transaction. Why this is happening? Because if when the transaction number incremented to 2, it automatically go to the no transaction, and that way we are able to convert the RE framework to a linear process, and this becomes your template for the linear process, right? Now what you have to do, just save this template, right? So I'll go to the project, linear process, open the project folder, right? So here you see linear template, template for linear process. I'll just send it to a compressed zipped. Okay, and this becomes our template. Okay, and this is the template guys which I am going to put it in the website, right? And now for my future references I am going to directly use this template so that I don't have to convert the template again, and I hopefully now you guys also have the same template with you. So the template which we just created would be available in the same website after some time once it is ready, right? So you would see the template here in this someplace, right? So the link to the website is again available in the description, but I hope you don't require it, right? But in future if you sometime forgot it, you can just come to this website and you can download the template. Okay, so we have coded the automation without the RE framework. We have seen what was missing, right? Log was missing, a lot of things were missing, right? We created the framework, and we also know that what are the benefits which RE framework provides. Now the next thing is, let's redo the same automation in RE framework and also parallelly discuss what are the benefits which we get, right? So we have the framework which we have just created, which is a linear framework. I have kept it as a copy, and in this new one I am going to do the code for the automation which we just discussed. Okay, so let's code the automation now in RE framework, which is a linear process. So this was our requirement. We have to go to this website, export the CSV and log the time, right? It can be anything, right? For this is just an example. Okay, so first thing first, right? I'll close everything. Our template is ready. Okay, the process start with initialization, right? We have, all of us have seen that, right? Now you would see here, as I was talking, we have something benefit which is called the configuration file. So RE framework has the config. I go to the project, and in the data I have this file which is called the config file, right? This is a feature which RE framework has provided. We have already explored this, right? So this is the first benefit: assets, constant, configurations, everything is available for me, right? And the next thing here, if you see, is kill all process, which makes sure that the environment is clean. So I go here and I say open the workflow. Okay, which process I want to clean? So my automation requires only edge is open here. So I go, I say kill the process, and in the process name I say MS-edge. That's it. Okay, sorry, not in the process, in the process name, my bad. In here we say MS-edge. Only one activity that cares of cleaning the environment, right? I hope the people who are coming from an RE framework background understand this. In case guys you don't understand this complete framework, we have explained each and every activity in detail in both English and Hindi. Please do watch to better understand this context. Okay, so we have cleaned the environment. Now if you see here, logging I am also getting by RE framework. I also got the settings, config, everything available here, right? Now I have one XAML here which is called init application, which is initializing the application. I want to run it in the edge, but I can always open the application in the process, right? If you have multiple applications to open, you just have to place it here, right? It's just a template now. Okay, so only one change here. The next change was in the get transaction, but since we are in the linear, I don't have to touch this. My framework is for linear. I directly go to process transaction. Inside the process XAML, I say open the workflow. Here we have used this log message previously. I'll just delete this. Next, what we have to do? We have to open the browser. So I say open a browser. Again, the same concept, right? I'm not getting the classic activities because the project is created on modern. So I can go here and I say classic. Okay, classic versus modern also guys is a very interesting and must to have feature, right? We are exploring this in the different playlist, so you would find those links also in the description. Please do watch the modern one, right? Nowadays all the automations, everything, all the new things are moving towards the modern experiences guys, so please get familiar yourself with the modern experience as well. Okay, so I'll go and use the open browser here. Okay, so this one, drag and drop it here, right? Now what is the URL? This is the URL. If I put it here, then you would say that Mukesh, what is the difference, right? I do not hard code anything in RE framework, right? We have this gentleman, this big guy, which is called the config file. We put the value here. We create a key which is called URL, and we say here this is the URL. Okay, we have already explored this in the different series, so not spending much time here, just to show you guys how easy it is, right? So now in the URL, I simply go here and I say that from the config read the URL dot toString. That's it. I save this, and now in future whenever the URL changes, I simply have to come to this guy and change it here. I do not have to rewrite the automation, right? Second benefit. Now let's go here and click on this. I go to the activities and I say click, drag and drop the click activity, indicate on the browser, point it to this guy which is export the CSV, right? And then we wanted to have a log message. Drag and drop it here. This is a info level log, and now I say that data exported, and then I wanted to have the time, right? But now the same thing applies here also, right? Tomorrow if the business says that, hey, I want to use a different message, that means that this message also I can put in the config file, which is here. So I'll put that message here. Okay, data exported, and I will say that this is the message, right? Now in future if this changes, just change it here, right? So I say that data exported successfully after, just to validate, right? After RE framework, right? Anything, do a control plus S. This message we are going to now use in here. Instead of this data exported, we say that read it from the config, right? Guys, I am doing it fast because we have already explored this in the RE framework series. Objective today was to just show you guys that how to convert it, right? So I say message dot toString. Okay, automation completed. The same automation I have now written in the RE framework, which is a linear, right? So if I go to the main, let's save everything. Config should be closed, right? And your config should not have hyperlinks, right? Please remember, remove the hyperlinks. Okay, I'll close the config. See this is already open, right? Now I have not written any code to specify to kill it, right? I just use the framework. Now see the benefits. I go here, I say run the file. Keep an eye on this edge, right? RE framework, make sure that you clean the environment. It makes sure of the logging. It use the configuration file, right? It will clean up the environment first. Okay, see, environment cleaned. Now it has relaunched, but now it has launched the Edge browser, right? Because I never told it to use the I, right? So I'll go here and I'll stop this process, right? Because the default browser set for my computer is Edge. So I'll close this. I'll go to the process, and in the open browser, in the properties, I'll say that choose Edge. Okay. Now let's save it. Go here and I say run, right? Now cleaning of the environment would be again done by the Robotics Enterprise Framework. It will read the values from the configs, do the logging. We have made the messages also configurable, right? A lot of benefits. Goes to the suppliers. It should click on the export CSV, right? Clicked and given the message. If I go to the output, you would see that I am getting all the messages. I didn't write it, right? The primary skill resolution is this: initializing the setting, killing the processes, opening the application. It started with the first transaction. Then it says that data exported successfully REF. This is coming from the config. transaction was successful, finished, right? So all these logs I have not written. I just converted the RE framework to use for a linear process, and I am getting all these benefits, right? So that is why it is helpful always to get and use it with the help of RE framework, right? Now one more thing, you would notice here this complete code is written in proper exception handling mechanism. You have the try, catch, business exception, system exception, everything is handled for you by RE framework. You have the relevant logging, you have all the log messages, everything available. You just have to use the framework, right? All the business exception, handling of the system exception separately is done by RE framework for you. Retry, closing of the mechanism, graceful close, hard close, all of that whichever we have discussed in the RE framework now applies to your linear process as well. How cool is that, right? I hope you understood this feature, and let's go back to the presentation, right? So we have done the same automation in the RE framework, and I now get some of these benefits, right? Trust me, this is a small sheet. We have a lot of benefits which we have explained in both Hindi and English, right? Please do watch that. So today what we have done is we have converted a robotics enterprise framework to use for a linear, and now I believe all of you have a template with you. Okay, so that is it. Let's quickly summarize. Today we have seen that RE framework can be modified to work with linear processes. We have a lot of benefits, we have a lot of advantages when it comes to use of RE framework. We just have to do small manipulation in the actual framework and it start working with the linear process, right? The framework which we have created, the zip file whichever I have created would be uploaded to the website along with the previous material of RE framework, right? So in case you are starting your journey with RE framework, just watch the video in English and Hindi and get the complete insights, right? So with that, I would like to wrap this video here. Thank you for watching. If you have any more questions, any more doubts, feel free to write those in the comments, and see you in the next video. Thank you for watching and happy automation.